Good evening, folks. Reloading Bench back with you once again. And I thought I'd take a minute to do a recap because now that my machining class is coming to an end, I wanted to look back about what it covered and what I learned. And in terms of, I would say the class for me was more about quality of technique and learning what not to do as opposed to how many projects can I complete. And there were a handful of projects, as you see here. I think the very first project was different types of drilling on a drill press. Drilling reaming, drilling tapping, drilling countersink, counter bore, and then a countersink, deburring, and again, steel. And very, very simple stuff. Not complicated, but when you don't know how to do it, and then trying to do it, and again, every project had a cut sheet, so doing it according to the dimensions, the cut sheet, like with reaming, you would drill a step down and then ream to the appropriate size. Same thing with a tap. You'd have to drill to a specific size so that you could then tap to that size, the counter bore and then the counter sink. As well as the deburr. So again, it was kind of cool to take a piece of just plain steel and do something with it. And something like this, big deal, not fancy. But again, learning the technique in terms of how to do it, how to get those measurements, how to get those lines in terms of where you're going to actually drill, where you're going to spot drill before you actually drill, how you hand tap, or use the drill press to align the tap and then manually do it. So a lot of cool projects, and we would go from one machine to another and then maybe back and forth. For example, once we finished this particular drilling project, it came to a layout project where you take a piece of steel and use a bunch of die chem, and you're based on the dimensions on the cut sheet, you're transferring those dimensions to parts of this particular piece of steel and then doing your particular drilling and or whatever, and etching in or scribing your dimensions. We were supposed to cut this out, but the school didn't have the saw blade in time, so that didn't happen. But again, simple stuff that you kind of take for granted in terms of how to get a particular degree turn against lines. So the value of the class was learning how to do this stuff, not so much perfecting how to do it. So jumping from there to taking an aluminum block that was not quite this large, but much, much larger than this, and then being able to, tram the mill, square the object in a vise, so that once you had a particular surfaced squared surface or faced surface, you would then, depending on what you're trying to do, rotate it and get the other subsequent sizes of the block to the tolerances that were on the cut sheet. And again, looks simple, but trying to get it exact and surface that with an end mill. Again, tools that some of us have never worked with. Pretty cool. Moving on to the first lathe project was taking, a piece of aluminum like this and turning it into this. Again, looks pretty simple. But again, to the dimensions and what you're having to do to pay attention to filing, learning how to filing in only one direction, filing so that you don't screw things up. Pretty cool to actually then do something and learn how to use the lathe. But in order to use the lathe, we had to create the tool. And I did create a video on making this tool because I had screwed up so many times in class that I ended up buying another couple blanks from the rainforest and trying to prep it at home only to do it at school. And my tool worked great for me in terms of, creating chips. So these are all various aluminum chips from parts of my project. This is from drilling this hole out. And I just think it's just a cool methodology. I mean, these aren't perfect chips. Obviously, you don't want spirals. You want little tiny chips as opposed to, decorations for the Christmas tree. But again, to be able to take something like this in its raw format and then cut to dimensions in terms of drilling, counterbore, countersink, using a boring bar, using different tools, a grooving tool, moving from something that's relatively simple to something more complicated, more complex, and again, dealing with tapered angles, 10-degree angle, 45-degree angle, half-inch hole, 3/4-inch bore, again, and different dimensions in terms of, an inch, inch and a half, an inch, how much a particular groove needs to be, working with tolerances and being graded on how close you come to those tolerances. Just like in order to create this particular tool, we were practicing on wood just to figure out how to use the grinder and what it does. Left-handed tools to make my right-handed tool. And then the final project was taking, for me at least the final, was taking a block of steel like this and again, using the techniques learned on the aluminum in terms of, how to square it, how to surface it, how to face it, and doing the same thing with a chunk of steel. And again, culmination of different techniques to do the drilling and tapping, different size holes, different dimensions, different offsets, different types of tools for actually doing the facing and the surfacing, the cutting, end mills. It was a really, really interesting class. So I made a list of things that I learned or I was exposed to. And I talked about a little, some of those there, honing, speeds and feeds on the lathe, facing, cutting, on the mill, drilling, deburring, tapping, facing, tramming, more complex objects, tapers, various tools, the boring, the grooving, spot drilling, reaming, deburring, countersink, tap, filing. Filing was a big one. Learned how to correctly finally use a file. Layout, die chem, gauge blocks. Loved using the double beam height gauge in terms of scribing, putting this up against a square and scribing. More drilling, deburring, and even learning how to square an object in a vise for the mill. Something that you would think is very, very simple, using the parallels, but then to face 6 different sides and get them to tolerance was, again, a lot of learning. So the class for me wasn't about the accomplishment of the actual projects. That was satisfying. The learning and having the instructor come by and say, yeah, you might want to do it this way or that way. His big emphasis was there's no wrong way to do things. There's just different ways to do things. But on some of the machines, there's better ways to do things than others. And he was very good about sharing his knowledge in that space. So for me, that class was a win. Especially, again, learning how to read a micrometer, learning how to correctly read a micrometer in terms of its different components, the calipers, all of the different tool sets, working with the DRO. You just can't get these kind of tolerances by eyeballing something. You could create something like this eyeballing, but you're not going to get the specific tolerances you need unless you use something like a DRO, especially with something more complex like this. So the class was a huge win in terms of the learning process and taking those skills and those learning opportunities back home, so I don't mess up in the garage as much as I previously did. So good stuff.